The G7 countries, the world's most powerful democracies, are meeting in Italy. And one of the most significant decisions they've taken is to use Russian assets as collateral for a $50 billion loan to pay Ukraine. The West has, of course, confiscated nearly $300 billion of Russian assets held in the US and the European Union. These were frozen after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Now, this $50 billion loan will reach Ukraine as early as the end of 2024. But will President Putin strike back at this move? I have with me today Major General Sanjay Meston and Dr. Swasti Rao to talk about this. And of course, Anthony joins me here in the studio. Welcome to the News9 Plus show, General Meston. Unprecedented prospect of using one country's collateral, assets as collateral to pay a loan to another country which is fighting a war with that country. I mean, explain for us how unique this situation is and whether President Putin is going to respond to this, and if so, how will he do it?
Good evening to you. It's a very interesting development. In fact, I would say that perhaps one of a very, very major decision taken by the G7 countries, and that too on the first day, the very opening day, and I think it was one of the first agendas, and with President Zelensky also present there. So it's a very, I would say, tough call which the West has taken, and basically it is G7, but indirectly it is also the West, because these are the most leading or the advanced countries, which are, and I would say 60% constitutes from Europe itself, besides of course Japan, Canada and the United States. A very bold decision taken. I think another two factors are that Japan and Ukraine has also signed a 10-year security deal. And not only that, the United States and Ukraine have also signed a 10 years security deal. Now, these three have got a lot of implications. Firstly, why they have been done. I think it shows a very, very strong, bold decision taken. Not only that, it shows that the West is united. And I think the Russian aim right from day one was after the conflict, and though West was united initially, Russia, perhaps President Putin had felt that the West may collapse and their cooperation may start cease to existing because of the gas and all these Europe was dependent heavily on the gas and the winters of Europe, and I think they have sustained through.
Right.
So that is point one. The West has now become strong, and the best part is President Biden has actually been a very strong advocate of NATO, unlike President Trump, where again recently he had threatened that the European or the Europe NATO needs to pay more and something of that sort. So this is a very bold initiative taken by the West, and it the security also deals signed by two countries and including Japan. Now this all shows that today the impact is firstly going to be there on Russia. Let us also recollect the past, 2014, when Russia had invaded Crimea. That time Russia was part of G8,
Yes.
now which is of course G7. They were expelled in 2014. However, there were no this kind of activities which has happened post Russian invasion. This nothing else happened, and why it didn't happen? Because NATO or International Security Assistance Force, comprising of 52 countries, were tied down in Afghanistan. So they didn't have the political will, they didn't have the military wherewithal
Right.
to put their focus somewhere else. Now they have started focusing totally on Ukraine, and I think somehow I feel the overall war scenario, if you see, Russia has lost out on some ways because two more countries, Finland and Sweden, have joined NATO.
Yes.
And I think the way things are going on, this is a big indication. President Zelensky has stated today that now this is the road to join NATO, the security deal between United States and of
Yes.
course Ukraine.
Yes.
So all these factors is now going to have a lot of pressure on Russia. Now,
A lot
what
of
will
pressure on
do?
Russia. General Meston, I'll bring Dr. Swasti Rao in. Dr. Rao, the fact that, as General Meston pointed out, the West is trying to portray a unified stance when it comes to Russia. The war is entered the third year. It'll possibly go on for a fourth year even.
Yes.
What are Russia's options in a case like this? Now, on the 23rd of May, President Putin signed this presidential decree saying that they're going to confiscate American assets in retaliation. How are they going to retaliate? Given the fact that I don't think there are very many American assets in Russia, what are Russia's possible retaliatory options? Could it be financial? Could it be strategic? Could it be, for instance, selling weapons to parts of the world that are not so friendly to the West?
Russia does not have so many options right now, except for escalating the nuclear threat, which for a long time, I think if you look at the statements coming from President Putin, and very recently, as recently as last week, he was at the St. Petersburg Forum, where he said that he kind of ruled out, any nuclear escalation or any nuclear response to what he plans to do in Ukraine. 2022 October, he had done the same. But then you have also other Russian mouthpieces, for example, Medvedev and others who have been sort of threatening the world with a nuclear escalation. So I think except for this pendulum that swings between yes to a nuclear response and no to a nuclear response, I actually don't see too many things happening apart from a more strategic alignment, and I would say deepening of the strategic alignment between China and Russia.
Right.
Because and that perhaps is the biggest thing that the West has to handle today. Because, regardless of what happens in Ukraine per se, regardless of how long the war goes on in Ukraine, you mentioned until the next year, my assessment is that the war is not going to go anywhere, at least until the end of 2026, because that is the level of military preparedness right now.
Right.
So regardless of what happens in Ukraine, whether the front line remains frozen, becomes a little more dynamic, or whether Ukraine is more successful in isolating Crimea the way things are going right now as we are talking, I think Russia is going to get pushed with China, regardless of these outcomes. And that perhaps is something that the West is racking its brain to sort of tackle, because, that is otherwise, as far as the nuclear option is concerned, I don't see that happening because all the red lines that Putin had earlier mentioned have actually been crossed, and we have not really seen a response from Putin in any way. So I honestly don't buy this argument. Yes, we will see more nuclear saber rattling, but I don't see that really happening. And I guess everybody that I talk to, most of the people that I meet and interact and sort of, get into these discussions with are of the same opinion, because on the one hand, now you're seeing that the Ukrainian radars have targeted not just the 300s, 400s, but also the S-500s. There's also been, news of Sukhoi 57 being taken down by Ukrainian drones. You also have news of the Russian strategic radars being taken on by Ukrainian drones. And then you also have the red lines that the West had imposed on Ukraine for using the Western weapons inside Russian territory. All those red lines have also been blurred, and still there is no response. So in a very, very practical sense of the term, I do not see any particular option that Putin can exercise right now, apart from the general saber rattling, and like I said, the strategic realignment or deepening of that realignment with China. Apart from that, as far as the assets are concerned, and that's my last point, Russia does not hold as many assets, and just one rectification, of the West, and just one rectification out there is that what you just saw happening at the G7 sidelines, this decision that has come up about Russia, the G7 agreeing to using profits from Russian assets. The frozen assets, this is nothing new. Actually, this has been on for many, many months now. And what has happened, there is a bit of a, difference that we need to understand. So the assets remain frozen. The assets are not confiscated. They are not really liquidated or something like that. They remain frozen. It is basically the interest which is earned on those assets. And half of those, and one should also know that the US holds very little of those assets. Basically, the larger share of those assets are the EU. Yeah, and the Europeans have always been of the opinion that it doesn't make any sense to actually liquidate or those assets, because they are better used as bargaining chips. So what they have decided on is now they have reconciled that position at the G7, and they have come out with a joint front in using the profits earned from those assets to be sent directly to Ukraine, which is now to the tune of 50 billion, because it's not just the money, as in the dollars, $300 billion which are frozen, but also all the confiscated yachts and other properties, and that collective profit is now about to the tune of 50 billion. So, even if Russia were to retaliate, the value isn't, any significant value to create any pressure on the West or to force the West to
Very
step
clearly,
down.
Dr. Rao, as you said, that it's not going to be economic, because Russia doesn't have that kind of economic options as it does with the strategic sphere, which is the nuclear saber rattling. And of course, we saw the Russian nuclear submarine surfacing in Cuba. But General Meston, the fact that, as Dr. Rao mentioned, that she predicts the conflict could go on till 2026. You think loans like this $50 billion loan that comes in at, as early as the end of the year, could actually result in enhancing the war, Ukraine's ability to fight gets a leg up because of a big loan like this coming in, $50 billion, and therefore the conflict could prolong beyond 2025 and even to 2026.
My take on this is, firstly, how long will this war carry on? And will this economic aid, which is now coming $50 billion, will it add up to the, war waging capability
Yes.
of the Ukrainians? I doubt very much. See, what is happening now on ground, that the military forces of Ukraine actually are facing lots and lots of problems. For them, the most important is weaponry, and
Yes.
besides, it is the morale. Hats off to the Ukrainians that the morale has been very, very high, but now of late, especially in Kharkiv area and all, they were constrained to give up certain areas because of lack of ammunition. And in any war, if ammunition is not forthcoming, it impacts the morale very, very much.
Yes.
I personally feel the way war is going on, see, President Putin also has actually realized that what was his stated aim. I think those 4 provinces which he's already annexed, Donbass region as it is, he was there, the Russians were there indirectly after 2014. But the 2 other areas which they have added, I think, I personally feel Putin in his mind has also now very, very clear-cut aim that they want into this war. And that is why, he had recently visited, that is the visit in between Xi Jinping and even Putin, and the activities going on in Switzerland. I think both the countries and the West have realized that this war is endless. Perhaps now I think it has to be some give and take from both sides. And I think some kind of a diplomatic and backdoor diplomacy would be continuing to finish it off. Otherwise, neither of the sides is gaining. So this aid which is going to go, it is definitely not going to add on to the military much. Yes,
Right.
the economic construction, because it requires power and electricity and all these issues are there. So perhaps it would be focusing that and rebuilding gradually, especially other areas, which are not in the direct firing line. So those areas will have to be reconstructed gradually. But one message is very clear in this to Russia, that the West stands united, and I think I see at the end of the day, NATO in whatever, Ukraine in whatever form they are, perhaps they would be joining NATO, or maybe one of the bargaining tools here could be that once a ceasefire is drawn, and perhaps Russia may have to withdraw from some areas, I think the deal may be struck that Ukraine will not be a part of NATO. Because some kind of a win-win situation has to be there for West, for Ukraine, and
Right.
also for. So some kind of this amicable solution perhaps may be there, and I definitely agree with the previous panelist that Russia has got very limited options in this case. Nuclear, no way. I am also convinced. One statement only I can add: if you just go down into history, if Japan had a nuclear weapon, let me tell you, United States would have never formed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They wouldn't have done, because they would have
Right.
expected a retaliation. So today all countries, by and
Yes.
large, the leading nuclear weapons, so it's just a saber rattling. It's really not going to, it's just a pressure point. And if
Yes.
both sides realize the pressure points, and if either of the side initiates it, then it's a mutually assured destruction. So where is it
Yes.
leading to?
Yeah.
So therefore, that's the pressure point, and otherwise Russian options are limited. And coming on to also the China, alignment with China alignment with Russia.
Yes.
My take on this is See, West has been a very, I would say, alliance which has been there post Second World War. Russia, China have never been allies. In fact, these are opportunistic allies.
Yes.
Now, today, China also realizes that it has to do a lot of trade with the European Union, with Africa, and in fact, even with India, and it has got issues in Taiwan and in South China Sea. So, therefore, tomorrow let's analyze if there is a conflict situation between India and China, whose side Russia will take. So, therefore, these alliances are not permanent, unlike the West.
Yes.
And if Iran is subject to a lot of things, so I think their permanent ally may be North Korea or maybe Syria. These China and the other countries, they are opportunistic. So they will keep changing. Look at India today. India is also in a place where
Yes.
today we have to decide whether we align with West or today we align with Russia.
Right.
So we are today, playing a very, very strategic autonomy.
We are playing
But I
a
think
game of strategic autonomy, and sooner we'll be asked to choose. But Dr. Rao, you mentioned this possibility: the longer that this war continues, the deeper and firmer will be the embrace between China and Russia to meet this the common challenges both of them face. How is this going to impact your position, given the fact that you're looking at the Chinese deployment along our borders, and
Yes.
if there is a conflict, Russia will have to choose, and Russia still remains our largest military supplier. How does this impact this whole Russia, China, India axis?
Yeah, yeah. So I agree, Sandeep. It's a very uncomfortable situation for India, and all these arguments the shades of different arguments that you see on this particular topic about Russia, China, this alignment, whether Russia has become a junior partner or whether it's a marriage of convenience, whichever way you want to look at it, no limits friendship or whatever. I think the point to understand is that. It's not really a military alliance. So I agree with the general in that regard that it's not really like a Article 5 kind of a security guarantee etched in that kind of a stone. So nobody is talking about that. When I say that Russia and China in a deeper strategic embrace, I think it refers to things like China's support of Russia's war economy. And if you see what has happened, I'm sure you must be keeping track of these figures that IMF have released. And so many people in India interpreted that as Russian economy doing very well. In fact, what the figures really showed was that Russia has directed about 7 to 8% of its total GDP to now the war effort, to the military-industrial complex. And as a result, you see a kind of a growth in Russian GDP, which remains to be a small GDP by all standards. It's to the size of the size of Spain at least. Now, what happens is that because of this kind of an overheating mode that the Russian economy is in for supporting its war effort at Ukraine, is something that they cannot do without Chinese support. When I say Chinese support, what exactly do I mean? I mean 3-4 things, and I'll tell you what it is. The first is that it's basically China that is providing all the fiscal support to Russia. You may have heard that something else also happened along the sidelines of this particular G7 summit when we were mentioning Ukraine and US security agreement. The US has put fresh sanctions on Russia's foreign exchange. Okay. By that, now the Europeans and the Russians will not be able to exchange and trade in US dollars anymore. This was also expected for a very long time. In fact, when people were talking about why the sanctions are not really very efficacious, not very impactful, one of the arguments or solutions that was always given was why not actually sanction the foreign exchange, which has finally happened now. Now you can get into a different debate of why the US took so long, if there were any US or European interests at stake back then that are no longer at stake now. We can get into a different kind of a debate for clarity otherwise. But what has practically happened is that now there is virtually no way you can actually trade, do a dollar trade in Russia. And as a result, what you see is that the ruble has plummeted. Just as we're talking today morning, the ruble was relatively stable at about 90.
Dr. Rao, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. We're completely out of time, but thank you very much for your thoughts, for your time. As always, General Sanjay Meston, will Putin strike back at G7? There will be a retaliation of some sort. We don't know what it is, but thanks anyway for your thoughts and your time. The G7 versus Russia and by extension China as well.